Hi, everyone. Welcome to Barefoot with Spirit podcast show. I'm your host, Leanne, the Barefoot Medium, and I'm really excited to connect with my guest today so that we can share some information that will support you in navigating the kind of cosmic weather and energies that are happening at the moment. So those of you who don't know me, my name is Leanne, and I'm an international medium, an intuitive criminal investigator, twin flame, and transformational coach. I am so blessed to be able to connect people from all over the world with their passed over loved ones and to be able to support people to manifest and create healthy, loving relationships in their lives, as well as what their needs, wants, and desires are in work, business, finance, etc. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of our land on which I stand and on which my guest stands, and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And I offer that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and First Nations peoples from all around the world. Now, kick off your shoes, take some beautiful deep breaths into your heart space, and drop it into this sacred container as we have this intimate and deep conversation with my guest, Natasha Weber, on navigating energy using your celestial compass. Now, Natasha is also known as Astro Tash and is the resident astrologer for Channel 7's The Morning Show and horoscope columnist for Marie Claire Australia and Mamma Mia. She is passionate about astrology and sharing insights with people about how understanding this language can help people navigate and align with astrological shifts that shape their world and humanity. Natasha is also the author of Your Celestial Compass, Astrology for Self-Discovery and Empowerment, which helps people to unlock the power of astrology to understand themselves, their relationships, and their soul's purpose. Wow. Welcome, Natasha.
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Leanne. And, you know, as you were introducing yourself as an astrologer, I was just thinking, gosh, I'd love to know your birth chart. Do you know your placements?
I have had them done. Offhand, I don't. I know that I have quite a lot of Virgo and Capricorn in my chart.
Okay. Do you
So
know
I think
what's
there's,
your sun sign?
I think my sun sign is Capricorn and the rest are Virgo.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that would be, that would lend itself to an extreme perfectionist. Someone who is wonderful with the details, but also a propensity to be self-critical.
Yeah.
So my advice to you with all that Virgo would be just let it go. Learn that perfectionism isn't necessarily something that you need to be striving for. I mean, here I am giving you a little impromptu reading. Sorry about
Oh,
that.
no, that's
No.
okay. I'm a reformed perfectionist,
Oh,
and
I
still
love
have
that.
perfectionist tendencies that pop up, and I'm really aware of them. One of
Okay.
the examples of that might, listeners might or watchers might find really interesting is as a teenager or in my early adult years, and I still do it. I have the exact same hangers in my wardrobe, and they all face the same way. And my clothes are organized into thin straps, short sleeves.
I love that.
And my sister and my mum would often try and borrow something without telling me and put it back. And I'd walk in and go, "Who used that?" And they'd be like, "Oh my God, how does she know?" I'm like, "Yeah, I just know."
Because you notice things that others miss. But you know what? It's not just the Virgo, it's also that Capricorn, because
Yeah.
Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is the planetary tough taskmaster.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
but it also gives you the ambition. So, I mean, you're definitely destined to be very successful in your life, and you'll be very hardworking and ambitious towards your goals. But it's about enjoying the journey a little bit and being
Yeah.
kind to yourself along the way. But I'd love to do your birth chart and take a look at it, because I'm thinking you must have some Scorpio in there. Scorpio is an energy, a lot of people see Pisces as being the psychics of the zodiac, and that is true. But I often find that Scorpios have this gift as well, particularly with your background in criminology and your forensic interests there. That's extremely Scorpio. So
Okay.
it's nice to find a bit of like a Scorpio moon or a Scorpio midheaven or something.
Yeah, okay. My husband's the Pisces, so
Oh.
which is really interesting. And we just had a conversation. So I know we mentioned off air, and a lot of my viewers and listeners will know that, you know, my PhD research is around criminology and looking at homicide investigations. And him and I were just talking about a movie that he needs me to watch because it's about criminal investigations and details. And I said to him, "Is it really odd?" And he said, "Well, because he's got this real creative side and media." So I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I get it."
But
So he
I
opened
see.
me to that side
Yeah.
of things, which is great.
So you're like, you have these opposite energies and opposite interests, which is exactly true of the Virgo and Pisces. They sit directly opposite each other on the birth chart. And while technically this is not an ideal compatibility placement, I actually put it in the compatibility basket because I think that particularly, and probably this only relates to romantic compatibility, because it's a case of opposites attracting and that type of dynamic that's a little bit magnetic and
Yeah.
complementary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
Thank
perfect.
you for sharing that.
That's okay.
And everyone else gets to hear a little bit about me, a little bit
Yes.
more about me in amongst it. So thank you. Talk to me about how you got interested in astrology and this type of work.
Yes, well, my mother and my Oma, Dutch for grandmother, are
Yeah.
both clairvoyant. So my mum used to do the automatic writing.
Mhm.
So right from childhood, I would sit there at the dinner table and watch her do seances. So I was very open-minded and exposed to that type of practice and that type of thinking and way of being. So I guess it always felt very natural to me. And then I went on in my life and I had a ballet career, etc., etc. And I just came to a crossroad when I had my first child, my beautiful daughter, and I knew I had to study something, but one thing I felt in my bones was that this thing had to be something that I felt insanely and wildly passionate about. I've got a lot of fire in my chart. So,
Okay.
passion, I'm big on passion. I think it's our greatest motivator. And I'm not just talking
Yeah.
about romantic passion, passion for life. But I didn't know what that was. I had a rough idea, and I was tossing up between three different things, and astrology was one of them. And so I was praying to the universe, which I do a lot. And I was asking for a sign. Like, please give me a sign. I was quite obsessed with it for weeks.
Mm.
And my sign did not come until one day it did. And then I ended up going into Channel 10 at the time, and I spoke with the other girls that I was working with there. I bumped into, do you remember Karen Morgold, the astrologer?
I
Yeah,
do.
she was incredible. I had a 40-year television career as an astrologer. So I bumped into her. And normally I've got a Leo moon. A lot of people think that Leos or anything Leo should be uber confident, but sometimes the Leo's journey is to develop that confidence. So Leo moons especially can be very shy, particularly in childhood. So approaching someone like that with my own agenda, I would never have done, but I really saw this as the sign I was praying for. And I know this is a convoluted story, but anyway,
It's all good. Yeah.
that's a Gemini thing.
Yeah.
So I did approach her, and she rang me the next day with the recommendation to a school, which was the Australian Academy of Astrology and Cosmobiology. And I attended that school for 3 years part-time, and then I was invited to join their senior research group. And I just fell in love with astrology. It answered so many questions about my own character, my own motivation, who I was at my core. I
Mm.
had that sort of aha moment as soon as I saw my birth chart and understood what it meant. And it's a modality that makes sense to me because I've got a lot of spiritual placement in my chart, but I also have a lot of really practical stuff
Mm.
going on. So astrology for me works because it's a beautiful combination. I call it a combo between math and mystic because
Yeah.
it's quite mathematical.
Yeah.
Um, the way that I talk about astrology, though, is more, relatable to everyday life because that's what I'm about. I'm about talking to the mainstream people who
Mm.
need the astrology. The astrologers don't need it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I joined the senior research group and I did 15 years with them before I
Wow.
even went out into the world with it. And when I did, it's like the universe heard me and then just media stuff kind of dropped in. And I've just said yes and showed up to the opportunities. Thank you, universe, for that beautiful blessing. And the rest is really history. Yeah. And I have to say, this is an incredible moment of a full circle moment and real serendipity, I think, that after meeting Karen Morgold all those years ago, and then, of course, fast forward 24 years,
Mm.
and I landed the position of the resident astrologer for the morning show, which
Mm.
was Karen's old role. So I actually ended up 24 years later stepping into her shoes.
Yeah. Wow.
That was, yeah, that was so profound.
It's amazing how in certain moments in time and a human level, we don't quite understand that path and that purpose or that journey that we're going on. The divine universe, source, whoever you want to call it, knows where we're heading and will put things in our path to allow us to align with those synchronicities and those opportunities that, you know, align with our passions. So I want to talk to you about a couple of things that you've mentioned. I love that you talk about passion, um, because, you know, there's a saying that's popping in my head to share with people around, you know, if you're doing what you're passionate about, you'll never work a day in your life.
Yeah, big believer in that.
Yeah. And so, you know, if those of you who are listening or watching really take a moment to ask yourself, what am I passionate about? And like you said, it doesn't have to just be in that romantic sense. Now, I know I mentioned my husband earlier, and I'm blessed that he opened me as a Virgo and a, you know, very earthy and practical
Yes.
and, you know, perfectionist and kind of high achiever and academic and that sort of thing.
Right.
He's Latino. And so, you know, bringing that passion and that
Woo!
fire and that,
Passion right there.
yeah, right. So, um, you know, when I met him, I embraced that. Okay, he's really passionate about quite a lot of things here, and that's what passion looks like, sounds like, and feels like. How can I embrace more of that in my own life? So I love that you mentioned that outside of that romantic context, because we need to be doing and embracing and aligning with a life that's filled with passion.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's our greatest motivator.
Yeah.
And I think it's the thing that leads us towards our highest potential,
Yeah.
spiritually, personally, on every level.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you found that through a romantic relationship or
Yeah.
part of what passion can look like
Yeah.
through your partner himself, which is beautiful. But I guess there are so many different ways that we can forge a path towards our passions.
Yeah.
And I would sort of suggest that for me, it was just about really tuning in and
Mm.
also tuning out the naysayers and tuning out just more destructive sort of
Yeah.
forces.
Yeah.
Personally, sort of around that time, I was also in a marriage,
Mm.
a marriage that is no longer. And I was living an inauthentic life. I was studying astrology, but the attitude coming from my partner was more along the lines of, oh, you don't think people would really want to hear about that, do you?
Mm.
It was very undermining. And for a long time, I believed that story. And it wasn't until I started rewriting my own story, stepping into my power, being brave enough to walk a life alone as a single mum. And I mean, I now have a gorgeous partner.
Yeah.
He's also he's Italian, so there's a lot of passion there, but that's by the by. But yeah, and it wasn't for me. It wasn't until I sort of was brave enough to walk away from that suppressive environment, and that helped me to then discover and, more importantly, follow my passions. Because it's great to have passion, but sometimes, you know, we can hold it inside, believing that we're not good enough, we're not capable enough. Why should we follow our passion? Because someone else will be better at doing it anyway. So just being brave enough to like actually act on pursuing that passion.
So I love that you've shared that. And I am going to caveat my meeting my husband and the passion. So you and I share a similar background in a lot of ways. I was, my previous relationship prior to him, universe, divine synchronicity, etc. I stepped out of that relationship, which was very similar. I was studying and doing my personal and spiritual development, stepped out of a senior management role, highly stressful environment, no idea what I was going to do. I just tap on the shoulder from spirit, universe, write your resignation, and I did. And part of that was the unfolding of that relationship as well, which resulted in me selling my property, packing 2 suitcases and going to Colombia.
Wow.
As part of what I thought was part of my research for my PhD around criminology and homicides. And a month after I arrived, I walked into a new place where I was going to be staying. And that's where my now husband was.
I love that. And I'm just thinking in my head, the universe was probably contemplating, okay, how are we going to get her over here? Because she's never just going to leave on a whim. Have to make it around something to do with studies and PhD.
Correct. So I will caveat that, and that trip for me was around that PhD, but it was also gifting myself that space, which I didn't have, to step into purely focusing on me.
Yeah.
And healing from that relationship and really learning about how to let go of those unconscious beliefs and patterns and things that I'd picked up along the way, and the inner critic that was often having a field day as a result of my own self-talk and others' self-talk around, you can't talk to dead people. And I say that in that way because I have fun and play with it in amongst it. So, and that's part of how that passion comes out, is you feel joyful and playful, and it's just exciting to step into it.
Oh, it is, isn't it? And I ended up, and firstly, can I just congratulate you, woman to woman, because
thank you.
That's amazing what you did. Yeah, and it's scary. And and look at you spreading beautiful wings now and doing
thank you
that you're doing.
So. Thank you. It's takes growth and takes stretching, and that's what we're here to do. So
absolutely. And it's not easy. It took me 10 years to leave that relationship. It was a 22-year relationship, and it took me 10 years to actually grieve. Firstly, there was a lot of grieving, and then to make the move. But
and I think thank you for acknowledging that, because and a lot of women that I often have as clients, particularly around the twin flame and soulmate work, it's about kind of attaching ourselves to who we are in that relationship context. And so as women, it's and men as well, you know, my husband's done a lot of work on himself in his past as well. But it's about kind of owning our power and knowing who we are and what we need in relationships, and really filling our cup first, and knowing what those needs are. And so, you know, women who do stay, that's okay as well. And women who do have that pathway or that purpose to
Yes.
step out, that's okay too.
Absolutely. And we all have different journeys and different lessons to learn. And for some people, it may mean working on an existing relationship. For others, it may mean stepping out of it.
Okay.
I mean, that's also what the birth chart in astrology can help to reveal. And then the timing around that also, you know, with the planetary cycles and working with those and knowing when is an opportune time to make a break like that, or when it's time to hunker down and actually, you know, face things and work on the relationship. This is planetary cycles can really assist.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how that might present itself for people in their practical world? If you know that, how might you notice if the universe, source, divine, cosmos is giving you that kind of heads up, I guess, to go, it's time to hunker in and work on your relationship, or it's time to be brave and have that courage to take another step on your own?
Well, firstly, I mean, as we said, it's different for everybody. So everyone's birth chart is going to look very different. In fact, I say that the birth chart is as unique to you as your fingerprint, because it's like a snapshot of the sky at your exact moment of birth. So that's your time, your date, your year, and your location, the latitude and longitude. So, and when you think about it, that moment in time and space that you were born has never happened before, and it will never ever happen again in the future. So, you know, all the planetary alignments in the zodiac signs are all displayed in a birth chart, which looks something like a circle with lots and lots of symbols. And then it's the mathematical relationship that all the planets make to each other. And and then we've got the rising sign in the midheaven. In Western astrology, we use the houses, which shows us the different areas of life that the energy of the planets and the zodiac signs will play out in for us. So to answer your question, how might we know when it's a time to make or break anything? So one example that I'm thinking of is the Saturn cycles and the very famous Saturn return. I don't know if you've heard about the Saturn return, and the people out there, if they've heard about this, but Saturn, as I mentioned before, is the tough taskmaster. It holds us to account. And when Saturn returns, which means that it comes back to the position that it was in at your time of birth by degree and by zodiac sign. And that is associated with a bit of an astrological coming of age. So Saturn takes around 29 years to make one orbit of the sun. So it takes exactly that time to make one orbit around the birth chart as well, and return to that same position it was in at your time of birth. When that happens, we feel kind of like stepping up to responsibility. Life might throw us a bit of a curveball around that. And how that plays out for you depends on your chart. Do you have Venus right next to your Saturn or connecting with Saturn in your chart? In that case, it might have to do with relationships. And Saturn is about two things. It can be about commitment and sticking things through and stepping up to responsibility, or it can also be about separating. And Saturn's also a very karmic planet. So it's often called the Lord of Karma. So this is where we, you know, life will present those opportunities. And I think that the best advice that I would give around that is not to shirk away from anything that feels too difficult or too tough in that moment around. And, you know, it's your age around 29. That's easy to work out. You don't really need an astrologer unless you want an exact window of time. So it's around the age of 29. A
Mm.
lot of people around that age will take on a mortgage, will get married, they might have their first child. Some people, like myself, will deal with health issues.
Mm.
And this is because Saturn happened to be in my sixth house of health. So
Mm.
how that sort of coming of age, but wow, I grew up fast around that Saturn return to do with those themes around
Mm.
health. It will also separate us from our, more frivolous party ways. It's kind of like saying, okay, time to get mature and time to grow up now. But also, it's not just the Saturn return, and I do talk about this in one of the chapters in my book, about how it's broken up into 7-year little mini milestones or
Mm.
mini cycles. So every 7 years, this Saturn cycle is you're getting an opportunity to step more fully into that more mature, responsible, evolved self that the Saturn return will bring. And that is, according to those 7-year age increments. And I explain that more fully in the book.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, yes,
I love how you explain that, because one of the other things you mentioned earlier was that mathematical aspect of astrology.
yeah,
And I love how you put it in such practical, easy to understand terminology, because I'm going to put my hand up and go, astrology is
yeah,
lost me a little bit along the way with some of the explanations of that. And I'm not a mathematical person, and I can see a colleague who is a numbers person going, "You're okay with numbers." I have gotten better at numbers, but it's not my strength.
yeah.
And so I'm aware of that. And so I love how you talk about the numbers part, and that brings in your logical kind of mind and your analytical brain and the researcher part of you, which I love. And that's often the masculine energy that I talk about with a lot of my clients.
Right.
And the get stuff done, and the logicer, the planner, the intellectualizer, or the overthinker sometimes. And
Yeah.
the spiritual side of us, that they can actually work together. So, that spiritual side is that more feminine energy, and that flowing and connected to the intuition and connected to source and following those
Yeah.
nudges. So I love that you talk about those two things in such a grounded and balanced way.
Thank you. I mean, that is my mission. That's my passion in astrology, is to really relate to the people who are coming to me, who want to know how to use astrology to make their life better. That's what it's all about. And if astrology has a very distinctive language,
Mm.
but if you're listening to an astrologer and they're using language that you don't understand, firstly, that's not going to feel good, and that's never my intent. And
Mm.
secondly, might miss the point because you don't understand the lingo. So, I do steer clear of all of that. When I'm in my academic environment with my other astrologers, I go to town and all that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. But yeah, my work is really about relating it to the person who just really wants to understand how to improve themselves as well, because I think that astrology can be a fantastic way of really understanding who we are, our motivations, our strengths, our areas to work on. That's important too. And then how it relates to everyday life.
Yeah.
So, and I just want to talk about speak to what you just said about the masculine and the feminine energy,
Yeah.
because this is what I love about the different modalities, from psychic medium, understanding the masculine and the feminine energies. It does relate to astrology and how, I see that, and in fact, I built my logo based on this principle.
Ah,
Yeah,
okay.
because it's a combination or an integration of the sun and the moon. So in
Mm.
astrology, the sun represents the masculine principle. It's about the go-getter and life force and that vitality and ego actually as well, the sun represents. Whereas the moon is more intuitive. It's the divine feminine. It's the soul. And in a birth chart, when we look at the sun, it represents our basic character and how we like to shine our light out into the world. And the moon is a deeper layer to ourselves and to our being. You know, more on that soulful level. And we really need to integrate both of those energies. And in the book, you know, I talk about masculine and feminine, but make a real point about this is not about gender.
No.
This is an energy that needs to be integrated and balanced in men and women alike.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I know that, you know, I love that you mentioned how it intertwines, because we all at the end of the day work with cosmic universal divine energy, and we use different language and terminology to interpret that energy and bring it to the world.
Yes.
And to those souls that we are meant to support in their journey and their learning and their growth and their path forward. So I love that. And what came in when you were talking about that was, you know, that mediumship side of things. And often I hear mediums bringing through passed over loved ones who talk about, you know, the soul, this, I have an energy with me. And for me, it kind of grates on me, because it's like, yes, they're an energy, but they were a soul who lived on this earth. They're a person,
Right.
they're a human. And so there's some specific terminology that's often used in that mediumship space that, you know, for viewers or listeners, I'd love for you to kind of check in with yourself and see how it feels for you. Because for me, it's about bringing through and the essence of the person that lived, their personality, their experiences, their being. And I think sometimes we get caught up in that, sometimes that ego space of using the correct terminology or terminology that others are using in the field, rather than working with what our soul knows to be true and right and clear for us, which is that feminine intuitiveness that comes through, compared to that ego kind of heady space that I often talk about.
Yeah, and I imagine if you're working with clients who want to connect with someone who's passed over to the other side, being able to do that and bring forward their essence and who they were in the lifetime where your clients would know them would be so much more cathartic, so much more of a blessing, rather than just referring to them as an energy. Yeah.
And in truth, we all return to energy as a soul. It's how we connect with the human person with us as well. And so I love that you bring that balance, and that's why I wanted to kind of mention that, because when we're spiritually connected, it's also important that we're humanly connected. And we think about how we ground that knowledge and wisdom to bring it to people, as we're meant to, if that's part of our journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, in the birth chart, we can see an idea or an inkling of a past life and what we've brought in from that past life to this lifetime. But then this lifetime has different lessons to learn. And I always think that you know, we're a spirit, we're a soul that's having a human experience. And I believe that we have, you know, we choose different human experiences to evolve the soul.
Yeah.
And
that then brings in what you were talking about with different people and the fingerprints that, you know, are there for our own path and our own journey, and how Saturn and the Saturn return can give information around that.
Yes.
You know, I think it's so important that we really honor ourselves as souls in amongst our own journey, and also honor the souls of those that have gone, and spirit and the divine, and whatever our connection is to to that.
Yes.
Um, what I wanted to talk briefly about was you talked about those cycles coming back around, and it reminds me of that. And you mentioned karma, and I want to ask you what your belief is, or what is karma for you?
I think that, oh yeah, that's big, because when I think about karma astrologically, I would look at the south node and the south node placement in a chart. What zodiac sign is it in? What connections is it making? And this can give us some idea about, the lessons that we bring in from that past life and the karma that we bring in. In my view, karma is simply a lesson to be experienced, or an experience to have in this lifetime, in order for us to develop towards our north node qualities. So the north node will be directly opposite the south node. Some astrologers believe, because in Vedic astrology, which is an Indian branch of astrology, ancient and extremely popular in India, they call the south and the north node the dragon's tail and the dragon's head. And
Yeah.
a lot of astrologers believe we need to actively reject our south node qualities.
Mm.
But I'm, my 24 years of experience, I really see it differently. I think that it's simply that we don't need to work towards those south node qualities. We don't need to develop or focus on trying to progress with those qualities, because they are qualities that we've brought in already. We may have already achieved those qualities associated with that zodiac sign in past lives. So it's about saying, okay, well, I'm bringing in the Virgo qualities, and I'm saying that because my south node's in Virgo with all that perfectionism. It's okay. It's good enough. I don't need to waste my focus there, because I already have that. I already have that in my being, because I'm bringing that over from a past life. If you had a south node in Aries, confidence may not be an issue, and self-belief may not be something that you need to focus on. You will need to then focus on the Libra North Node, which is about cooperating with others and working harmoniously with other people in this lifetime. So I think that we bring in those qualities from a past life, and that's okay. Embrace them, accept them, and then move towards focusing on what the North Node wants you to learn and develop, which is your karma
Yeah.
that you're creating in this lifetime.
I love how you explain that, because I know that word in particular can often bring up things for some people, and some people see it negatively. And for me, that karma word and the work that I do in particular is just about rebalancing
Yeah.
or closing loops, right? So you talked about those experiences that we have, and you might be invited to close some doors or walk away or dig in and work it through. And so I often talk to people about karmic loops. And it might be an experience that you started in this lifetime, and you're working around that loop, or that experience or that situation or that skill or ability, whatever it might be. And you might need to keep learning and growing in that space until you close it or you master it in some ways. So I love how you talk about that, and the loops, and the fact that karma, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's something for us to accept, that what we often put out comes back.
Yeah, I think you and I are on the same wavelength when it comes to karma, for sure. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think karma is a punishment,
No.
if you like. I don't see that as being helpful to our soul's evolution. And I
Yeah.
think ultimately that's where it all, that's the pinnacle. That's what we're meant to be focusing on. And there's no lesson in the punishment necessarily. I think, if anything, the closest it might get to is putting us in someone else's shoes, that
Yeah.
possibly in a past life we've not had empathy for a certain situation or a certain type of person, and then and maybe this is where the lines, the understanding is blurred, because then in the next lifetime you might have an experience in that space. But I really think it's simply to teach you the empathy so that, again, your soul can evolve and grow. It's all about growth.
Exactly. I love that. And, I kind of sit that with that criminology aspect as well, because there's often that victim offender kind of dynamic that plays out there. Now, I don't want to dig into that too much because I'm aware of time, and you and I could talk about stuff for hours.
I think we could.
Talk to me a little bit about what how I would term it is that energetic climate, I guess, or the cosmic climate is doing at the moment or in the next little bit, so that you might be able to help people navigate what's going on.
Yes, we've got an incredibly intense month this month in March, in an incredibly intense year, I might say, in 2025. It's a really challenging year, but I do believe that we will survive, we will come out of it, and 2026, particularly from mid-2026, I think is looking or beginning to look a lot lighter and brighter. So two answers to that question. So one would be what's happening immediately, and then the other one is kind of a broader view of this year. So just to start with immediately, we've got a double retrograde period, with Mercury in retrograde through Aries, and later then through Pisces, and Venus also in retrograde through Aries and Pisces. And there's a lot of Aries and Pisces activity going on. And in short, I believe that this is a lot to do with ending old cycles and beginning new cycles. And I say this because Pisces is the last 12th sign of the zodiac, and Aries is the first sign. And we're also beginning a brand new astrological new year, which will start actually tomorrow on the 20th, when the sun moves into Aries. So when this happens in the Southern Hemisphere, it aligns with the autumn equinox. And this is very much about winding down, in preparation for winter. The equinox marks the period where the day and night is exactly equal. And the spiritual symbolism is, about closing down, coming into a space of quiet, and preparing, I suppose, for, a new cycle that's ahead down the track. In terms of, there's just so much to say. I know strategic. I'll need to get into my strategic mind. Let's start with Mercury retrograde. So when any planet goes retrograde, it's internalizing the energy. So it's not a terrible thing. And you can use it wisely. And again, I talk about this in the book because I think it's so important. Let's learn how to use the energy that we're being dealt with. Let's learn how to navigate the cosmic climate to our best advantage with what we're being given at the time. So a retrograde planet internalizes the energy, but that means that it's not necessarily supportive of pushing forward with anything new in the areas to do with what that planet represents in astrology. So with Mercury, that represents communication, travel, technology, machinery, all of that sort of stuff. So we don't want to be starting anything new, and we don't want to be pushing forward to progress in those areas unless it's something that we've already started and it's particularly supportive of doing a redo, going over old ground in those areas. And a really good example is when I wrote my book, I did so much of the editing in a Mercury retrograde, because that Mercury represents how we think, how we communicate, and writing. So when it's reversing, it supports going within, and it can bring up some amazing epiphanies and ideas. And I just went into full hermit mode, which is great for a retrograde, and being really productive kind of behind the scenes. But there are different types of energies to every retrograde, depending on the zodiac sign that that planet will be reversing through, of course. This kind of flavors our experience. So with Mercury reversing through Aries right now, I would just say be mindful of dishing out any ultimatums. Be mindful of speaking your mind if it's going to take you into a place of anger. We want to be assertive. We don't want angry verbal flare-ups. So that is very typically aligned with the Mercury retrograde through Aries. Aries is the warrior sign, and it represents, you know, how we assert ourselves and being bold and being confident and all of that, which is great when it's expressed in a healthy way. But when Mercury is retrograding through that sign, that can go AWOL. And then we're also experiencing a Venus retrograde. This will be until mid-April. And Venus, of course, rules love, rules relationships, also rules beauty and our self-worth and money as well, because it's all about our values, you know, and money is aligned with that. So when Venus is going backwards, these things can come up to be questioned. So a lot of people might find that they're really questioning their needs and their desires in their relationship, in their romantic relationships right now. Also in their relationships with other women, female friendships, they can come under review. And we can find a lot of female friendships popping up from the past, you know, like a retrograde brings things up from the past. It can also bring up exes.
Yes.
So, you know, people know this about Mercury retrograde, and that can be true, particularly if you're broken up during a retrograde period, then the following retrograde can bring that back. But Venus is especially aligned with romantic relationships. So, yes.
I love that you talk about Venus retrograde as well, because Mercury gets a lot of air, I guess. I want to use that word. And people often know a little bit about Mercury retrograde and what that might mean, yet may think it's a bad thing and not know how to work with that energy. Now, I love Mercury retrogrades like you, and love to really use that and work with that energy to reflect on where I'm engaging personally in healthy communication patterns, or where there may be some patterns that I need to kind of revisit and look at and think about, where there might be some toxic, unhealthy patterns playing out in terms of my communication.
Yes.
And it's interesting that, you know, I've had to close a loop in a profession, and I say it that way, or wrap up a professional relationship in relation to my PhD research in the last 2 days. Yeah, and it's been sitting there and sitting there and sitting there, and I love that Mercury gave me an insight into where it was teaching me something. And what it taught me was that there was a red flag a year and a half ago that I let slide, and I put boundaries in place, and they weren't respected, and flag 2 came up, and da 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 da. And so we're a year and a half down the track, and Mercury's gone, no, we're done.
Yeah. I just love the way you say red flag as well, because now, maybe a year and a half ago, Mercury was retrograding through a different sign at the time, and that didn't support any sort of movement or a sort of realization about how you were going to deal with that in a concrete way. But in Aries, and Aries is associated with the color red.
Right.
So it's just sometimes
I love that we're so connected on that, even though we do different modalities, I guess. So, you know, what I love about that is I wasn't ready to let that go, because I hadn't got the learning that I needed on a soul, on a human level, like you talked about with that growth pattern around karma, right? And so my learning was, I had a story playing out with, I'll give people 2, 3 warnings and then that's it. And I'm like, hang on a minute. Why am I allowing red flags to continue in my space when why am I not having that discussion when it first comes up? And so there was a real awareness for me around how much I allow.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, as you mentioned, we're just not ready.
Yep.
But then I do think that the universe often provides those cycles in repeat, because when you think about it, think about our solar system, the planets are constantly in movement around the sun, they're constantly in orbit. And so those cycles do repeat. And in fact, I'll give away a little trade secret here. The way that I do my predictions, because every year I do sort of big predictions for the year ahead for Channel 7. And the way that I do them is by looking back at the past cycles of that planet and how they align and how they translated into our historical experiences. And then we can get an idea of what we're going to expect this time around.
Yeah.
So that can be applied, as you mentioned, to your personal experience as well. And we're
Yeah.
all trying to figure it out as best as we can. And we may not get it the first time around. We may not get it on the first cycle. And that's okay too. That's okay.
Absolutely. And so that's kind of why I was sharing that example for people who are listening or watching, to know that no matter where we're at in our journey, we often have things that repeat, and we revisit them, or we look at them again, or we review or reflect in order to see how we're evolving as a soul, and if we're going to stretch and grow, or if we're going to keep repeating. And that's okay. Whether we choose to keep repeating, that's okay. And whether we choose to stretch and grow, that's okay as well.
Yes, exactly. And it's going to look different for everybody. And I will just go back to what we were talking about with Saturn, because we were talking about the Saturn cycles and Saturn's return at age 29, and then all the mini 7-year cycles in between that. But of course, then Saturn continues. If we grow older, we'll have our second Saturn return in another 29 years or so time. And so in a few years, I will be there. And so I'm reflecting on what came up in my first Saturn return and how I can better navigate the second one. And so I think that is the beauty as well with understanding our astrology, is that we can use our past experiences, not just for predictions and looking back at history, but within our own lives. What came up around that time during that cycle, and how can I do that better next time? And it might not be the same experience. You might have dealt with that experience, but it might be something similar, within that same energetic kind of expression.
Yeah, perfect. Now, I am aware of time, so I'm going to ask you if you can share one tip from your book. What would that be?
Oh, one tip. I would say, okay, can I sort of do two? I'd say
Yep,
start
of
with
course you can.
layering up. Thank you. Start with layering up parts of your chart. And if all you know is your sun sign, then that is a beautiful way of starting. I'm so proud to be a sun sign astrologer, because I think that the sun signs are the gateway to the more comprehensive ancient astrological study. So if all you know is your sun sign, read that, because I've gone extensively into each zodiac sign, all 12 of them, talking about, of course, the usual personality traits, strengths, weaknesses, but also, our calling, and beyond the cookie cutter ideas of what our sun sign is meant to represent, our sex style, love language, health and wellness, also the crystal that is most aligned with your sign, and the mythological story, because a lot of people don't understand the mythological story based, that their sun sign is based on. And I've written it in a way that you can understand, because it's quite, the mythology is quite complex. However, so yes, start with understanding that, and then you can layer up the rest of your birth chart, if you know your moon sign, if you know your rising, your midheaven, and of course it goes into love and compatibility as well. And I hope to break some, shatter some misconceptions around that. And then, that's still the first point. Sorry, folks. The second,
That's okay.
the second part of the book is to help people through those life cycles using the planetary cycle. So Saturn return, there's a bit about Mercury retrograde as well. And there's also the Uranus opposition, because Uranus opposes its natal position in the birth chart, and that's can be aligned with the midlife crisis and how to navigate that. So my tip would be understand yourself first through those layers that I just described. And then once you're in a more empowered state of self-awareness, then use the astrology to understand the cycles that you're going through according to your age and stage of your life, and use astrology as a tool. It's not the be all and end all. You still have free will. And that would be, I think that would be my top tip. There you go. I've had to talk a lot just to get to that. Use astrology. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool to help you understand yourself and navigate your life. There you go.
Perfect. Love that. And can you share where people can connect with you if they want to learn more about what you do or connect with you more, and also to look at your book and purchase that if they're interested as well?
Thank you so much. My website's astrotash.com, so come meet me there. And I would just, my little hot tip on getting the book is that amazon.com.au have it at a heavily discounted price. I do sell it on my website, but if I were you, I'd go to amazon.com.au and get a discount there.
That's
so
fabulous. Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your knowledge and your insights. Like I said, we could talk about this all day. So we might look at getting you back on an episode later down the track if you're interested in that as well.
I would love to. There are so many major planetary shifts occurring this year, and each of them deserves their own moment.
Some airtime.
But it's been a privilege and a pleasure speaking with you, Leanne. Thank you so much.
Fabulous.
I enjoyed our chat.
Thank you. And for those of you who've joined me and want to learn more about what I do, thebarefootmedium.com.au, and check out social media, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of those places. Thank you all so much for joining me. And until next time, check out the next episode of Barefoot with Spirit podcast show.